Yeah, it's coming.
It's on Facebook.
It's on
Yeah.
Facebook. I think Savita,
Yes, sir.
you stop that YouTube option. I think we will go with the Facebook Live. Okay.
Do
Okay,
you
sir.
want to try
Okay,
it
I'll do it.
again on YouTube?
Yeah,
Stop
we
it and then once try it once again.
yeah we are
Oh,
already on the Facebook. We'll someday we'll try on YouTube. So Facebook has
Right.
been done. I think we can start with the class. Okay, it's already 6.
Okay. 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 Go
Anay,
ahead.
we have got 1 minute more. Basically, Murli is busy because the OTP goes to Murli. So he's in COVID ICU. So I can't call him repeatedly.
so we will try some other time, sir.
Yeah. We can try some other time. So we'll. I think it's 6:30. We'll go ahead. I think Sumita madam is there.
Hi, Ritesh. How are you?
I'm fine, ma'am. How are you, ma'am?
Good. You can hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah.
I think we can start. It's already 6:30.
Yeah. I think I'm at home. Actually, Atif and Priyanka will be logging in from the hospital.
I think they have already logged in.
Yeah. So
I'm
we'll
saying,
just, we'll just go ahead.
yeah.
then.
Amjad, shall we go ahead?
Yes, go ahead, please. I'm all
Yeah.
yours. It's ready.
Yeah.
Shiva is online. Hetal is there.
Yeah.
Quite a few of us here, so I think we should go ahead.
Yeah. Hi, Shiva. Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Aura Fellowship class. Hope everyone is safe, sound, and healthy. I think many of the fellows and even some of the mentors, they will not be able to join today because many of them are in the COVID ICU doing duties. So, but still we have to go ahead with our class. So today the topic is supraclavicular brachial plexus block. It will be presented by the fellows from Care Hospital Banjara, our sister concern. So over to Sumita madam to carry on the proceedings. Over to you, ma'am.
Yeah. Thank you, Ritesh. Today's topic, as all of you know, is supraclavicular brachial plexus block, and we have two fellows, Dr. Priyanka and Dr. Atif, who will be presenting on this topic. Dr. Priyanka will be covering the basic anatomy and the block dynamics, whereas Atif will go ahead and talk about the techniques and the complications associated with this block. And later, I'll be talking for 10 minutes on some clinical pearls, and the final comments will be given by Dr. TVS. So I now invite Priyanka to open this AORA webinar with her talk. Priyanka?
Yes, ma'am. Good evening.
Yeah,
Can
go ahead.
everyone hear me?
We can hear you.
Ma'am, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can
Yeah,
hear
yeah,
you.
go
You
ahead,
can
go
carry
ahead.
on. Go ahead.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Priyanka Burde. I have done my DNB from MIOT, Madras Institute of Ortho and Trauma. Now I'm pursuing the fellowship in regional anesthesia and acute pain in Care Banjara Hospital under TVS Gopal sir with very good mentors like Soumita ma'am and Prakash sir. So I'm starting my presentation. Today I'm going to talk about brachial plexus anatomy. This brachial plexus block is actually a cornerstone of the peripheral nerve regional anesthesia in a practice. For doing any upper extremity block, we have to be sure and have thorough knowledge about the brachial plexus and its anatomy. Brachial plexus was first introduced by Cullen Kampf in 1911. But because of a complication of pneumothorax, it lost its disfavor, or it was disfavored. But later, this person, the Sir Lagrange, actually described the Doppler probe to identify the arteries and helped us to locate the brachial plexus better. This was the time in 1949 when the brachial plexus block was brought back to the limelight. Later, Sir Capral and et al. Described the ultrasound brachial plexus block. This is a simple diagram to remember the brachial plexus, how it origins. That is from the roots, the trunk, divisions, cords, and later branches. Now, this is a diagram showing a brachial plexus and its origin. The brachial plexus arise from the 4 cervical nerve root, that is C5, C6, C7, and C8, with the first thoracic nerve root, that is T1. These roots further unite to form trunks. They unite to form trunks on the middle border of the middle scalene muscle. These trunks are arranged vertically, hence they are named as superior, middle, and inferior, or upper, middle, and the lower trunks. These trunks are further divided into divisions. Each trunk is divided into 2 divisions, that is anterior and posterior divisions. So all the 3 trunks will be divided into anterior division and posterior division respectively. These divisions occur at the lateral border of the first rib. The divisions further organize, reorganize, reunite to form cords. So how these cords are formed? The anterior division of the upper trunk and the middle trunk unite to form a lateral cord. The posterior divisions of all the 3 trunks unite to form the posterior cord, and the anterior division of the medial trunk unite to form the medial cord.
I request everyone to kindly mute their mics.
Can
Kindly
the host please mute everybody?
Yeah. Kavita? Hello?
Yes.
Kavita, kindly mute everyone except the speaker.
Yes, I'll do that.
Where there's a common collection, no? You have not blood over there.
I will unmute Dr. this Atif Muhammad.
Atif.
I've asked them to unmute, sir.
Yes, can you hear me?
Sorry for the interruption. Sorry.
No problem, sir. Thank you. These cords are actually arranged with their relation with the second part of the axillary artery, and the cords further divide into the terminal branches. Each cord will be having 2 major branches and variable number of intermediary branches. Now we'll further go how these branches follows. The terminal branches will be these branches from the roots. These are directly from the roots. One will be dorsal scapular nerve, which will be supplying the rhomboidus and the levator scapulae muscle. The other nerve is long thoracic nerve, which have its root value as C5, C6, C7. It gets its branches from all the 3 nerve roots. Directly from the upper trunk or the superior trunk will be the suprascapular nerve, which will be supplying the supraspinatus and the infraspinatus muscle, and the nerve to subclavius. Both has a same root value of C5, C6 as they origin from the upper trunk. The branches from the cords, the lateral cord, as I told you, each cord will be having 2 major branches and many other intermediary branches. The 2 main branches would be the musculocutaneous nerve and the lateral root of the median nerve. The other one intermediary branches is the lateral pectoral nerve. All the 3 will be having the same root value of C5, C6, and C7. Medial cord. The main 2 branches of the medial cord are the ulnar nerve and the medial root of the median nerve. Other intermediary branches would be medial pectoral nerve, medial cutaneous nerve of arm and the forearm. The ulnar, all this have the same root value of C8 and T1 as they origin from the medial cord, and the ulnar nerve will have a nerve root added to it as C7, C8 and T1. The posterior cord. The posterior cord is formed from all the posterior divisions of all the three trunks. So the suprascapular, upper subscapular nerve, lower subscapular nerve, and nerve to latissimus dorsi, and two main branches are axillary nerve and the radial nerve. Radial nerve is a terminal branch arising from all the three nerve roots. So its root value would be C5, C6, C7, C8, and T1. Dermatomal distribution. To perform any block, a knowledge of dermatomal distribution is actually very important. The entire upper extremity, sensory, the motor, and the sympathetic innervation is given by three nerve roots, which are compactly placed in a small space. Since when we perform a peripheral nerve stimulation technique, since it is combined in very small compacted space, we get a various variety of responses, which will be further seeing in further coming slides. So we have to know the dermatomal distribution. Like the median cutaneous nerve of arm and the forearm will be joining with the branches of the intercostobrachial nerve, that is T2, and supply the medial aspect of the arm. This is necessary because in order to supplement when we supplement the block, when we tie the tourniquet during the surgery to avoid tourniquet related pains. The motor divisions or the motor responses during the peripheral nerve stimulators are also important to find out the response which is actually required, which we'll be seeing in the further slides. Now, next we come to variations. Normally, 61% of the population will have asymmetry in both the sides of the brachial plexus. So these are the common variations which we see. First is the supraclavicular artery. The brachial plexus lies superior lateral to the supraclavicular artery. So a branch coming out from the supraclavicular artery, that is dorsal scapular artery, might divide the brachial plexus into two halves, upper and lower. So this ultrasound guided block will make easier to identify the dorsal scapular artery and make a block easier. The other variations would be, like you can see in this diagram, there is no middle trunk. So the upper trunk and the lower trunk. So there'll be absent middle trunk is one of the variations seen. The other variations are the prefixed and the postfixed variations. When the C4 nerve root takes part in the formation of brachial plexus, it is called as prefixed, and when T2 takes part, it is called as postfixed. If T2 takes part in the formation of the brachial plexus, the C5 may take part, or it might be completely absent also. The other variation is the C5 and the C6 nerve root will penetrate the anterior scalene muscle rather than residing in the interscalene groove. This is an article which we can see for the reference for the other variations in the brachial plexus related to the major vessels. This diagram is showing you the prefixed part coming from the C4. C4 is taking part in the brachial plexus formation. In this, we can see the T2 is taking part in the formation of the brachial plexus. Indications. Supraclavicular. The supraclavicular block is also known as the spinal anesthesia of upper extremity. Any surgery of the upper extremity right from the shoulder to the hand can be performed using the supraclavicular block. So whatever the surgeries on the shoulders, arm, forearm, elbow, hand and wrist can be done and with supraclavicular block. Contraindications. For any block or any regional anesthesia, one absolute contraindication will be an uncooperative patient who is not giving a consent for a block. The other contraindications would be advanced lung disease. In this advanced lung disease, the compliance of the lung is low, and one of the complications of supraclavicular plexus block might be the phrenic nerve palsy. So we have to avoid in advanced lung diseases. Bilateral blocks are generally avoided, but when they have to be given, so we follow like supraclavicular block to be given on one side, and the other side we give an other block, that is we give distal block. It can be either infraclavicular block or an axillary block. Preferably axillary block is better. This is also the first two contraindications are mainly keeping in the view of phrenic nerve palsies. Later, if there is any local infection, coagulopathy, and allergy, we avoid giving peripheral nerve blocks at the site, local infections at the site of the block. Block dynamics. What actually does a block dynamic means? It means how a block behaves. So, as I told you in the previous slide, the dermatomal distribution, that is motor, sensory, and sympathetic nervous system, we have actually should have the knowledge about it. This is because these are the responses which we actually required when we give a block. So any elbow flexion which is caused by musculocutaneous nerve, or any extension of the elbow or wrist extension caused by radial nerve, wrist flexion by the median nerve, and the flexion of the fingers and the thumb abduction and adduction carried by ulnar and the radial nerve respectively. These are the responses when we see under peripheral nerve stimulator guided block. When we see these responses, we can actually proceed by giving the injections. This is the article related to the ultrasound guided costoclavicular block, but showing its sonoanatomy and block dynamics. These are the review articles or referred articles in which you can like comparison of ultrasound with various volumes. So in the block dynamics, even we have to remember that the block dynamics might be affected with the drug concentration, drug volumes, and also drugs we use. So in case of like C5 nerve root and the phrenic nerve whose root value is C3, 4, and 5, the distance between them is very small. It is like 2 mm. So as we move caudally, the distance between them increases, and we can give block performing like avoiding phrenic nerve palsies. Large volume of drugs should be avoided because it can again lead to phrenic nerve palsy and Horner's syndrome. And this is the last USG guided supraclavicular block outcomes. Anyway, ultrasound is a very, very fabulous invention in which we can see the view, and under visual guided, we can give the block to the targeted site. So obviously the complications with the ultrasound guided blocks would be less rather than giving blind or peripheral nerve stimulator technique. And peripheral nerve blocks with stratification risk, or the person who are on anticoagulants or antiplatelets, the risk is low as per the guidelines where we can perform peripheral nerve block techniques. Thank you. Stay safe. Thank you, sir. Thank you, everyone.
It was a nice presentation. Over to Sumita madam for the next. Hello. Hello. Yeah, Atif, you can start your presentation.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. My name is Dr. Atif Mohammed. And I'm a fellow here in Care Banjara in Hyderabad under Dr. TVS Gopal sir, with the guidance from Dr. Sumita ma'am and Kamla ma'am and even Prakash sir. So as my co-fellow, Dr. Priyanka spoke about the anatomy and block dynamics and certain complications, I'll speak about the techniques and complications of the supraclavicular brachial plexus block. I'll start the presentation now. So basically, as Priyanka has already mentioned, the block is performed at the levels of trunks and divisions because at this level the plexus is confined to a very small space. It is also known as the spinal of the arm, and it causes very dense and the block is very dense and it's and is rapid in onset. So the techniques, they can be broadly divided as the landmark techniques, or neurostimulation via the peripheral nerve stimulator, or by ultrasound guidance. So the preparation before the block, you'll have the standard ASA monitors, you'll have an oxygen source, suction, resuscitation equipment, and emergency drugs. And I've mentioned pre-medication here, but that is not given to all the patients, especially patients which are, you can use them for patients who are a little apprehensive, but most of them don't really require it. So you can just use midazolam or fentanyl for any average adult. So now coming to, so I'll start with the landmark technique, and I'll start off with the patient positioning. So the patient is usually positioned in a semi-sitting or supine position with the head turned away from the side to be blocked. The shoulder is lowered, the elbow is flexed, and the wrist is supinated. The reason for the wrist to be supinated is because you can see the goal of our block, which is like any finger movements during the nerve stimulation or during the block. So if just in case the wrist, which cannot be supinated, you can put a roll under it, so the fingers can be are free to move, and the operator stands on the side to be blocked. So in landmark technique, I'll start off with the point of needle entrance. So basically, as you can see in the diagram which I've posted right next to, you have to identify the lateral border of the sternocleidomastoid, which is the clavicular head, at the point where it meets the clavicle. That point is marked. And about 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters lateral to this point, which is always also known as the margin of safety, is the entry point of the of your needle. So as you can see in this picture, the index finger is placed around 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters lateral to the lateral border of the sternocleidomastoid, and that is the point where you enter the needle, insert the needle, sorry. So in this technique, the needle is first, initially it is inserted cephalad, and then it's advanced perpendicularly up to around 2 to 5 millimeters, and then turned caudally, and in a direction which is parallel to the midline. So in case when you're using a nerve stimulator, or I have an algorithm later on after the slide, which I'll show it to you. You can initially, initially you can set it up to 0.8 to 1 milliamperes, and once the ideal response is obtained, the injection is initiated. Yeah, so this is the algorithm by Nysora, which is basically a decision-making algorithm. And I hope everyone is looking at the screen right now. It's a little tiny to read, but so as soon as you get the patient inside the operation theater, position the patient, and after all the ASA monitors are all attached and etc. So after positioning the patient with the nerve stimulator set at around 0.8 to 1, you have to identify the landmarks, which is the lateral border of the sternocleidomastoid, which is inserting into the clavicle. And after you identify the landmarks, if you, just in case you cannot, you can ask the patient to raise the head of the table, by which the sternocleidomastoid becomes more prominent. And after identifying the landmarks, basically the goal of this block would be twitch of fingers at even at 0.5 milliamperes, that is either flexion or extension of the fingers, and which basically identifies the lower trunk. Insert the needle at this entry point. Insert the needle and advance into the anterior-posterior direction, and you should be able to see a response. Just in case, according to this algorithm, if there is no twitch obtained, you have to check if the nerve stimulator is working properly, redirect the needle. In case you have a shoulder twitch, you can say that the needle placement is into the proximity of the upper trunk. You have to you have to just redirect the needle. And in case you have a twitch of the biceps, triceps, or the pectoralis muscles, you can this indicates that the needle is in the medial trunk, and it's on the way to the lower trunk. Now, when finally the goal of your block is finger twitch, if it's obtained, that indicates that the needle is in the proper plane, which is the lower trunk, in the proximity of the lower trunk. You can decrease the current up to 0.5, and you can even go up to you can just aspirate and just inject the needle. You can actually check it up if there is a response even below 0.2. Some places written 0.3, some places written 0.2. But even if it's below 0.3, you can expect, and if there is still a twitch, you can expect that the needle is now intraneural. You just have to pull the needle out a little bit and do the settings again up to 0.3 till the twitching is absent, and you can just aspirate and inject the drug. So you also have this continuous technique, which is not ideal, which is actually not really ideal for the supraclavicular brachial plexus block, because of the high mobility of the neck and definitely the fear of catheter dislodgement. So the choices of local anesthetics can be from a levobupivacaine or bupivacaine to ropivacaine, and it depends on how long you want the block. And with that also, you can actually, the volume is also reduced with the ultrasound guidance. In case you're using a continuous technique, which is not really ideal. So the infusion rate will be around 10 to 15 ml of bolus, which is followed by 8 to 10 ml per hour infusion rate. And for patient PCA, patient controlled analgesia, you can have 3 to 5 ml of bolus followed by 5 ml per hour infusion rate. Now coming to the ultrasound guided supraclavicular block technique. So the landmark for this is, one of them is the clavicle, which is probably the most important one. And also sometimes you can use the subclavian pulse, which is not always palpated. So you will have, so the probe is just placed into the supraclavicular fossa, and it is moved laterally and medially just to locate the supraclav artery. Sorry about that. One second. Yes, so the patient positioning of this would be the block. It can be performed in a supine, semi-sitting, or lateral position with the patient's head turned away from the site to be blocked. And you can even ask the patient to reach for the ipsilateral knee, which further depresses the clavicle and allows better access for the structures. So the knowledge of the underlying anatomy is very important in relation to the subclavian artery, the first rib or the pleura. And the scanning is just usually started above the clavicle, approximately around its midpoint. So this is a very nice picture which shows the placement of the probe on top of the clavicle, and you can see the subclavian artery and the brachial plexus and the ribs. So coming to the technique, with the patient in a proper position, the skin is disinfected, and then you place the transducer on the clavicle approximately at its midpoint, and then the transducer is tilted caudally, and just to image the chest contents. And a brachial plexus is seen as a collection of hyperechoic oval structures posterior and superficial to the subclavian artery. Color Doppler should be routinely used so that you can avoid all the large vessels which are around this area. Usually they are the dorsal scapular, transverse, and suprascapular artery. So this is the image. You can see the subclavian artery, you can see the brachial plexus, you can see the first rib, pleura on the either side, and you can even see the middle scalene muscle. So you can see in this picture, you can see on the left side, you can see the trunks, the upper trunk, the middle trunk, and the lower trunk, with the subclavian artery on the first rib and the pleura below it. On the right, you have an oblique image which shows the dorsal scapular artery, the anterior and the middle scalene muscle with the rib and the pleura and the upper trunk. So this is the coronal oblique view of the transducer with the needle in plane and the patient's head turned away from the side to be blocked. So this picture shows the needle entry 1 and 2. So the 1 is around the upper trunk, and 2 is below the needle. 2 is below, is around the corner pocket, right, which is right next to the subclavian artery and below the lower trunk. So basically, you just do a 1 to 2 ml of aspiration just to know that you haven't injected any, you haven't poked any vessel, and you can just give a drug, just give the drug whatever you're using, and you use around 20, and basically you use around 20 ml or 20 to 25 ml of the local anesthetic is required for this adequate block. And also studies have also suggested a lower dose can be used for elderly patients. So this is a video from our hospital which is showing the pulsatile subclavian artery. You can see the first rib and the pleura on either side. You'll have a needle entrance. I'll just forward the video quickly. Yeah, you can see the needle entry coming from the lateral side. Yeah, right there. So it is very important that you have your eyes and on the needle, especially the tip of the needle, and your needle should be always visualized to see where you're going. So right now it's being directed towards the right below the lower trunk at a point called as the corner pocket. Go to the next video. Yeah. So we'll inject around 2 ml. We'll aspirate first, and then we'll inject around 5 ml at this point. The reason for injecting into the corner pocket is, number one, you can bathe the entire plexus, and number two, you can actually raise up the plexus for a better visualization. Yeah. You can see the local anesthetic which has been injected, and then the needle which is withdrawn, and it is directed now between the upper and the middle trunk, and the anesthetic is injected there. Right there you can see the anesthetic being injected, and then it is withdrawn again, and the needle is directed above the upper trunk and the anesthetic is injected there as well. Remember to always have your eyes on the needle, especially the needle tip. Right. So this is how the spread of the local anesthetic takes place around the brachial around the plexus. I'm coming to the complications. So the Priyanka has already spoken about them, but I'll try to go in more depth. So the common side effects associated with this block would be the phrenic nerve. Sorry, will be the phrenic nerve block with the diaphragmatic paralysis and sympathetic nerve block with the development of Horner syndrome. Horner syndrome, which has but these complications, they are typically self-limiting and they do not usually require any intervention. So then reportedly phrenic nerve block, it occurs around up to about 50% of the time, although this may be reduced by the use of ultrasound guidance. Intravascular injection with the systemic local anesthetic toxicity and hematoma formation can also occur. So to reduce the risk, there should be high level of vigilance is needed due to the rich vascularity of the supraclavicular region. And in case the supraclavicular block, this can be due to puncture of the subclavian, transverse cervical or dorsal-scapular arteries, all of which are located near the plexus at this time, at this level. Sorry. Another complication is pneumothorax. According to the older studies, which it occurs as often as 6.1%, but this complication is rare in modern literature. Studies have shown up to around 2%, 0.2 to 2%, and it is frequently mentioned that pneumothorax can complicating a supraclavicular block has a delayed onset. Although, if such cases have been published in literature, most of the pneumothoraces reported have been diagnosed within a few hours of the procedure and before the patient's discharge. And based on the available literature, the pneumothorax associated with supraclavicular block is uncommon, typically small, and it presents within a few hours following the procedure, and in some instances, it can also be presented up to 12 hours. So these are certain articles which I've put up, which compares the ultrasound guidance with the peripheral nerve stimulator guided technique for the block. And in all of them, it has been resulted that though ultrasound guidance, it takes time to master this technique, but lower volume of the drug is used. And with time, as you keep practicing, you can even reduce the time of the entire procedure. Okay. That's it. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you, Atif. Over to you, Sumita ma'am. Hello. Hello. Atif, can you stop your screen sharing?
Okay, I'll stop it right now. Sir. Right. Yes, sir.
Hello.
मैं बात करती हूँ, तो नंबर मिला मुझे, मैं बात करती हूँ। ओके, और ओके कौन? हाँ, करेक्ट। ओके, और क्या कर रहा था?
Ma'am, you're not audible. Samita ma'am, you're not audible. Hello.
Type it into the box, Ritesh. I don't think she is hearing us either.
No, she's not muted. She's not muted.
Can't really hear her.
Yeah. Ma'am, you're not audible.
Ritesh, I guess we should call and tell her.
Okay, sir. I'll just make a quick call to
Yeah.
her. Tell her.
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. Can you see my screen as well?
Yeah, ma'am, we can see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Priyanka and yeah, shall I go ahead?
तिथे तो असा आपला कप्पा आहे ना तिथे
Yes, ma'am, go ahead.
बेडरूम मध्ये
Lot of disturbance.
वरती.
Hello.
Yeah, Ritesh, there's a lot of disturbance in between.
Everybody is muted except you. Where this is coming, I just can't understand.
Okay, anyways, I'll go ahead.
Yeah, ma'am, please go ahead.
Yeah. So thank you, Atif and Priyanka, for your inputs on supraclavicular brachial plexus block. Although they've covered most of the points, I'll stress on certain specific things which are important from fellows' point of view. So supraclavicular brachial plexus block or subclavian perivascular block it produces very rapid and dense anesthesia of the upper limb, from mid-humeral level down to the hand. Yeah, from the mid-humeral level down to the hand because of the compact arrangement of the trunks and the divisions which come from C5 to T1 level. And it's often called as the spinal of the upper limb, as Atif has already told. But I think some people disagree with this statement because after giving a supraclavicular block, we do miss some segments. So all people don't agree when we say that the supraclavicular brachial plexus block is the spinal of the arm. So ever since this block was introduced in 1911, there have been quite a few modifications because these modifications were required because of the complications that were being caused by the traditional method in which we used to give our blocks. So we started with the paresthesia technique, then graduated to the nerve stimulator or the PNS guided supraclavicular brachial plexus block. And finally, now we are using ultrasound to give these blocks. So as already mentioned, the various indications for giving the block are the surgeries on the arm, the forearm, and the hand. And also it is sometimes given to provide analgesia after trauma or after amputation or to relieve the pain after CRPS syndrome. So I'll just quickly go on to my next slide. Yeah. So one point I wanted to share with all the fellows is whatever surgery you do or whatever procedure you're doing, it is very important to have a thorough pre-operative visit. And especially when you are giving the peripheral nerve blocks, it is important to document if there is any pre-op nerve injury, because later it should not be attributable to the brachial plexus block which you are going to give. So that is a very important point. A thorough pre-anesthesia checkup is very important before you do any procedure. As regards to positioning, depending on your comfort level, the supraclavicular brachial plexus block luckily can be given in various positions. It can be given in supine position. It can be given with a slight head up position, especially for the people or for the patients who cannot lie down supine or there is some pulmonary compromise. And people have also given this block in lateral position. So ergonomics are very important, whereby you are standing on the side where the block is being given and the ultrasound machine is placed on the contralateral side so that the operator, the plexus, the needle, as well as the ultrasound machine are in the same axis. So positioning is one thing you should spend around 2 minutes before giving a block, because when we are in a hurry, we quickly go and like scrub and start doing the thing without paying any attention to the positioning. So I feel 2 minutes spent on the positioning for giving your block solves a lot of problems. Another thing is the ideal response when we are doing a PNS guided supraclavicular plexus block. So what happens is, because of the compact arrangement of this plexus at the supraclavicular fossa, we have a whole variety of responses we get when we put the needle in this for this block. And the proximal responses in the form of neurostimulation of the biceps, triceps, of flexor carpi ulnaris, of flexor carpi radialis normally should be ignored, and the distal response in the form of extension of the fingers or of the wrist are accepted as the endpoints for injecting the drug for PNS guided supraclavicular brachial plexus block. The reason behind is that there are various anatomical studies which have shown that the fibers, the arrangement of the fibers in the trunk that supply the distal part of the hand is in the center. So if you are stimulating these fibers, there is a greater success rate of the block. So according to me, the ideal response will be initial deltoid response followed by the flexion or extension of the fingers. And once you get that response, we should be comfortable in injecting our local anesthetic agent. Another point to mention is, if your surgery requires a pneumatic tourniquet, you need to block the intercostobrachial nerve, which supplies the medial part of the arm. It is a simple subcutaneous injection which is given in the axillary crease, and you can give it in a line from the deltoid to the triceps using around 5 to 6 ml of local anesthetic agent. So in case you need to apply the tourniquet, I think the intercostobrachial nerve block is important. Now, a word about the ultrasound guided supraclavicular brachial plexus block. Apart from the subclavian artery, there are various other vessels, as Priyanka told us, which are available, which can be seen in between the elements of the brachial plexus, especially the dorsal scapular artery, which can be seen in about 40% of the individuals. So it is important that before putting the needle in, and as the part of the SCOUT scan, to put a color Doppler to make sure you see where these arteries are and avoid them when you are giving the local anesthetic agent, so that you prevent inadvertent intravascular injection. So it is important to look for any vascular structures before you put in your needle. You put your Doppler on and make sure you note the position of these arteries. So the complications have already been discussed, but beware of the hemidiaphragmatic paresis and Horner syndrome, which can occur because of the paralysis of the phrenic nerve and sympathetic chain when you have increased volume of local anesthetic which is injected. Although the phrenic nerve palsy can be more caused by the interscalene brachial plexus block. Pneumothorax is one dreaded complication. Because of this, a lot of clinicians stopped performing this block, and the incidence was as high as 0.5 to 6%. And definitely this block has seen a resurgence after ultrasound has been used, and a lot of people are started using supraclavicular brachial plexus again with the ultrasound guidance, because the rate of pneumothorax is definitely very less as compared to the nerves to PNS guided blocks. So as we told that the supraclavicular block, you can anesthetize the whole arm, and it can you can be used for surgeries on the arm and the forearm and on the hand. But if you combine it with the intercostobrachial plexus block and the suprascapular block, you can also perform the surgeries on the shoulder. And suprascapular block, we know it arises from the upper trunk, and this is the anterior approach to the suprascapular nerve. It is also known as the subarmohyoid suprascapular nerve block. And we know that the suprascapular nerve, if you keep your probe at the distal part of the clavicle and move it posteriorly, you can see the subscapular suprascapular nerve leaving the upper trunk just below the omohyoid muscle initially, and then it goes parallel to the omohyoid in the posterior triangle between the superficial cervical and the prevertebral fascia to reach the scapula. So it would be a good idea to keep an eye on this nerve when you are doing your supraclavicular brachial plexus block. And to further add to the discussion, as Priyanka had already said, a lot of people ask if we can give a bilateral supraclavicular brachial plexus block. Depends on the individual preference, but most of the clinicians avoid doing that because of the the complications. So in case you need to operate on on both the arms, it would be a good idea to give one block above the clavicle and one block below the clavicle. And also sometimes some questions which come to my mind, and I will open it for discussion, is we know that the subclavian artery and the first rib are the surrogate markers for performing the supraclavicular brachial plexus block. What if there is a congenital absence of the first rib, and what if there is a thrombosis of the subclavian artery? So what are the options in that case? And most of the times, in fact, I would say in quite a few individuals, we have seen the cervical rib, which sort of changes the anatomy of the supraclavicular brachial plexus block. So in that case, either the brachial plexus is divided, the superior trunk is somewhere and the inferior trunk is somewhere. So in that case, is it better to go ahead with the block or change it to some other approach, either do a infraclavicular or do a costoclavicular? So these are some of the points I want to open to discussion. Yeah, that's all from my side. Ritesh?
Thank you. Is TVS sir joining right now? Otherwise, we'll open for discussion. I think sir is not.
Sir is yes.
Sir is there. Yeah. Good evening, sir.
Good evening, Ritesh.
Yes, sir. Over to you, sir.
So, no, I really have nothing to say. I just came in, so I think Sophia has summed up very well.
Right, sir.
I think we'll open the session for the other fellows to come in and ask a few questions.
Right,
and
sir.
Let us keep this fairly interactive.
Right, sir. I want all the fellows to just come. They can unmute themselves. Any questions, any queries you have, just ask. After that, the mentors will come with their opinion. So over to all the fellows. Please make it an interactive session. Any question you can please ask. Fellows, kindly, and Samita ma'am, can you stop your screen sharing?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. I request all the fellows, please, any questions you have, please, you are free to ask any questions you want. Unmute yourself. Yeah, please, go ahead.
Sir, Ankita here. Hello?
You are audible, please go ahead.
Sir, I would like to know what are the cases where we can use a semi-sitting position for the supraclavicular plexus.
Sorry. Why do you choose the semi-sitting position? Is that your question?
Yes. Why semi-sitting position, and what are the cases where we'll use, like we'll go for a semi-sitting position rather than having the patient in a prone position?
Prone. Or did you say supine?
Sorry, supine position.
Supine. Okay. See, what I prefer doing is a semi-sitting position for all supraclavicular brachial plexus blocks with ultrasound guidance. Now, that makes it very easy to orient the probe. See, when you place the probe proximal to the clavicle, the placement of probe and the view you get, that is called the coronal oblique view. So when you have the patient in a semi-sitting position, to orient that probe to get the coronal oblique view is much easier. And ergonomically also, unless you're seated on a stool, most often you're standing. And when the patient is totally supine, you have to crouch in order to be able to give the injection. So for these two reasons, one is you can orient the probe much more easily with the coronal oblique plane. And the second is that ergonomically, it's much easier for the operator. So when you talk of ultrasound planes, there are three planes, isn't it, Ankita? There are three planes. One is the transverse or short axis. One is the sagittal or long axis. The third is the coronal axis, which splits the body into an anterior half and the posterior half. So when you're aiming to go for a coronal oblique view, having the patient in semi-sitting position makes it very easy to orient with that particular oblique plane. Is that all right? Have I answered your question? If Ritesh or Hetal or Amjad want to add, please.
I have another query.
Yes.
So we normally give a wedge while doing this, like when doing the supraclavicular block. So putting a wedge is better or semi-sitting position is better? Like which one is preferable? Semi-sitting position.
See, I have a bias towards the semi-sitting position. So I will say do it that way. But again, I think there are no hard and fast rules when it comes to positioning these patients. You should be able to do what you are comfortable with. So I don't generally put a wedge between the shoulder blades. For one reason, it is uncomfortable for an awake patient to have a wedge sticking in the back of the chest in between the shoulder blades. And when including cleaning, draping, and everything, the procedure takes not less than 10 to 12 minutes, even in a very experienced operator's hands. So you'll have to see what additional advantage placing that wedge in between the shoulder blades offers to you. Any comments on that from Rushali or Ritik?
Can I add,
Yeah.
sir?
Please.
So the purpose behind putting a small sandbag or a pillow below the ipsilateral shoulder, especially if you have a obese patient with a short neck, is that it just gives you a little more space to manipulate your needle. The place we are going to put your needle. So that is the purpose for putting a small sandbag or a pillow below the ipsilateral. It just gives you space to manipulate your needle. That's the only.
May I just add one point here? In whatever I have seen when I have tried to do it, or I have seen people trying to do it, it is usually for, say, proximal fractures of the humerus. It is extremely painful for the patients who are lying on table, and then you again put it.
Ma'am, you are lost. Ma'am, you are not audible.
Shomita's point. Am I not audible?
Yeah,
Yes.
right now you are audible.
Maybe I'll just repeat that first sentence that I said. I find that it is very painful for the patients who have a proximal humerus fracture to have an added bolster kept under their shoulder, because it simply increases the distance between the table and the fracture unless great care is taken so that they are comfortable with some concomitant analgesics. Point number one. Point number two, I totally agree with Shomita that in obese patients, this becomes very helpful, and it increases the space that your hands get while you put the needle, because it, the epi.
Ma'am, you are lost. Basically, sir, ideally, what sometimes we do when we have a patient with a short neck, exactly, I don't put a bolster or something in the middle of the back. I just decide to be blocked. I put under the back just behind it, so that you have a better space to manipulate your probe and manipulate your needle.
just place a wedge beneath the scapula on the side to be blocked.
Yeah, exactly. On the side to be blocked.
Makes sense, especially in an obese patient with
Yeah.
a thick neck, a short neck. It definitely opens up and gives more space for manipulating both the probe as well as the needle. Point taken. Any further comments? Senthil Kumar. Yes.
Sir, Senthil from Bombay. Hello, sir.
Senthil, carry on.
Sir, I have two doubts. Sir, sometimes when the bunch of grapes appearance which appears, which we get it typically immediately posterolateral to the subclavian artery, sometimes it is far off from the subclavian artery. And if the trunks and divisions are widespread, we have a confusion. So what we do for interscalene block is we do a trace back from the supraclavicular plexus to the interscalene groove. Can we do it in the other way around? Like we go to the interscalene groove, see the trunks, and then come down.
Possible, but how often have you seen the? See, first of all, if you continue to say a bunch of grapes, you will anger Shiva Shanmugam. See, he told you in the lecture he did some time ago that the elements of the clavicular brachial plexus are not available in fruit. So,
Yes, sir.
the elements of brachial plexus oftentimes lie posterolateral. I mean, how many times have you seen them at a distance from the subclavian artery?
Sir, I recently did a supraclavicular brachial plexus block, sir. I found it not immediately next to the subclavian artery.
Or was it corroborated by one of your seniors?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. I had a consultant along with him, and he also couldn't find it out. So we traced down from the trunks in the interscalene groove to the supraclavicular.
Fair enough. See, that is any method that allows you to identify a neural structure and trace either from proximal to distal or distal to proximal is acceptable.
Okay, sir.
Once you identify a particular structure and say this is the superior trunk, or this is C6, or this is C7, and then you trace it down and you see them evolve into trunks and divisions of trunks, that is definitely an acceptable technique, especially when you have difficulty. Was this patient very obese?
Not really obese, sir. Moderately built. Female patient on the left side.
Female patient. Was there any subcutaneous edema or something like that?
Supraclavicular fossa was full. It's not like a very thin built patient, but it was not edema as such. The thickness of subcutaneous fat was also less only, sir. Not much.
So I would tend to agree with you, Senthil, that whenever there is a difficulty, you should identify some neural structure and trace down to see how the structures evolve as they go further and further away from the neurons.
Okay. Thank you, sir. My another question is, hello, sir.
Senthil, and this is Dr. Shiva Shanmugam.
Yes, sir.
Actually, when we are scanning the brachial plexus elements in some of the patient, especially if they are thin and long neck,
okay, sir,
the upper trunk may divide into anterior and posterior division. The plexus itself will move out of the subclavian artery. You can see the cord arrangements even at the supraclavicular area itself.
Okay.
As TVS sir told, this is not a common. In very, say about 1 or 2% only you can see these sort of arrangements, where when the shoulder is completely shrugged down and the clavicle gone down, you can see the costoclavicular appearance even at the supraclavicular area itself. Basically, we are tracing the brachial plexus elements. Patients who has got where you can scan more brachial plexus element above the clavicle, you could able to see complex will be moving away from the subclavian artery, which is about to form the cords. That is what you would have seen in that particular patients, where the upper trunk is divided into anterior and posterior. Posterior would have migrated more away. Even in be one of the videos of our fellow which I have shown today, Atif. Even in one of his injections, you see the posterior trunk is well moved out. So, I mean, you could see those sort of pictures. If you understand what they really are, you will automatically scan them back and then see where they form the upper trunk. So there are in so many occasions we have done upper trunk injection at the interscalene, and we have access to the middle and the inferior trunk at the supraclavicular fossa. This is a possibility, but it's not as told. So, but you have to depend on, so now how to do all these things, you have to really depend on what they are. So you have to basically understand what those hypoechoic circle, and if you understand this, you will identify them consistently, and then you target them for effective position.
Okay, sir.
Santil, I
Thank
have
you.
one question for you.
Okay, ma'am.
While you said that you couldn't see the neural tissue around, were you able to see the rim of the subclavian artery very well and the rib very well? Were they visualized well?
Not very typically inside the sheath, like we see all the brachial plexus elements, ma'am. It was like dispersed. So I had a confusion whether it is, and it was not very typically hypoechoic circles.
The subclavian artery, you mean to say? Okay. Had you kept your ultrasound machine on the resolution mode or the general mode, or how was that? Did you try to do that? It could just have been a not very optimal imaging. It could.
We had kept it in the nerve mode, ma'am. We have a nerve this thing. We select the nerve this thing, and then only we do this things from the sonocyte.
I do understand your point, but I was just wondering, since you said that your patient was slightly on the obese side, sometimes if not the resolution, the general mode tends to show things better. So maybe if something as simple as that might help you out if you do not visualize what you intend to, because subclavian perivascular area is one that in fact is the easiest one to see, and hence the trace back thought has come from there. So maybe next time perhaps you can look into this aspect as well, the optimization of the image itself.
Okay, ma'am.
Something you get with experience.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Definitely.
The first and foremost would be, as Dr. Vishnani said, to optimize your ultrasound machine settings. You use the nerve preset. The nerve preset does nothing but it auto enhances the machine's ability to show you structure of interest much better. But he was also making a point about resolution versus general versus penetration mode. Now, when you do the resolution setting, the broad bandwidth transducer, which fires between say 6 and 13 megahertz, will preferentially fire towards the higher frequencies. So it will preferentially fire, say, around 11, 12, and 13 megahertz. So when you choose the general setting, it will fire in the mid frequencies. And when you choose the penetration setting, it will fire closer to the lowest frequencies, which is 6 or 7 or 8. So that is the importance of setting this, selecting this particular function. Shiva, you wanted to say something?
Absolutely. I mean, valid, because we are now looking at whether in an optimal image you couldn't able to find, or there is a problem in the image optimization itself. I mean, Senthil, now what we are discussing is all these points are required to optimize image in an optimal image with your best effort.
Yes, sir.
Whether you have done the best effort, that is why sir has asked if there any other validating consultant is around. That means there is no machine or performer problem here. You have done your best and the engine is optimally placed, and still you couldn't able to find the plexus. These are all the issues which you have discussed. So there are two aspects to it. You have to pay attention to the equipment as well. Once you have done the best part from the equipment side, that is an optimal settings or all you have tried out, but still you are seeing these sort of pictures, then what I said could be the possibility.
Okay, one other thing, Senthil, is
Yes, sir.
I'm reminded of Amjad's slide. He put a picture of Europe, a map, and one person was asked to say, pick out Switzerland. So Amjad very nicely said, you don't suddenly point your finger at Switzerland and say, this is Switzerland. You try to identify Switzerland from the structures that lie around. You will say, this is France, this is Spain, this structure, which is like a leg kicking a football, that is Italy. So Switzerland should be here. So what Rushali was trying to tell you is, you should identify your structure of interest with respect to the surrounding structures. So being able to pick up the first strip, the pleura beneath, the subclavian artery, the anterior scalene muscle, the medial scalene muscle, the lower belly of the omohyoid, all of that gives you an indication where to find your neural structures. And then you can zero in on that particular structure and try and optimize your probe orientation to pick up the image as best as you can.
Okay, thank you, sir. Can I ask one more question, sir?
Yeah, please, you can go ahead.
Sir, is that always necessary to combine neurostimulation with ultrasound for supraclavicular brachial plexus? Because I've read somewhere that it's not always required that we use nerve stimulation along with the ultrasound, because if we target the corner pocket and go inside the brachial plexus sheath and deposit the local anesthesia, I think it is sufficient enough for a dense blockade. One thing is that. Second thing, sometimes patients don't agree for a pre-op. Patients who ask for general anesthesia directly and not the block, for when we need the block for analgesia purposes alone, and we give general anesthesia without relaxant, and we can still use the nerve stimulator and give the block. The combinations.
See, by broad consensus, for superficial neural structures, no need to combine both ultrasound and nerve stimulation. If you are doing deeper structures, say for example, or a sacral plexus or an anterior sciatic in a big patient, or a gluteal sciatic approach, definitely it is indicated that you combine both your ultrasound and neural stimulation, especially for structures where there are no vascular structures in the proximity, which will give you a guide as to where your structure is or should be. So for deeper structures, it is always said that you should combine neural stimulation with ultrasound. But for something as superficial as a supraclavicular brachial plexus block, there really is no recommendation which says that you should combine both. Shiva, would you like to add?
That is perfectly all right. Both these devices are guiding device. When ultrasound shows thing, but we have to interpret it. When you are in doubt, suppose you are seeing some component, for some reason you not able to discriminate, is it a neural element or a non-neural element? In that situation, yes, you can use the stimulate and see where it stimulates. But if you are clear about these are all the neural structures, and there is no need for using a nerve stimulator. But in a deeper structure, why we are using it, the ultrasound resolution is not able to discriminate whether it is a neural or non-neural. Everything looks like an hyperechoic structure. At a level of 4 to 5 centimeter deep, the resolution of ultrasound is so low, we cannot discriminate between hyperechoic, hypoechoic, or even two different structures looks like a single structure. In those situations, since the ultrasound is not revealing what we want, we need another device to confirm that is a neural element. So there we are using a nerve stimulator. Whereas in a superficial structure, when you know it, you need not use a nerve stimulator. If you are still in a superficial structure, you are doubtful, say for in a femoral area, you are searching for a femoral nerve, which something looks like an hyperechoic, you are not sure about, it is not in a classical place. There you can use a nerve stimulator to confirm it. It is simply where we are using it. In a superficial structure, when you know things, it is not required. In a deeper structure, ultrasound itself will not show things, so you need another device to confirm.
I see Amjad is lying very
Yeah.
quiet.
Any more
Till
questions?
Amjad perks up a bit and gets his mind around. Senthil, the second aspect of your question, would you give a muscle relaxant devoid general anesthesia so that you can get the nerve stimulation. These are the blocks, at least in adults. I'm not too sure if the consensus goes towards performing blocks under general anesthesia. So I guess if it is an adult, maybe sedation, yes, but GA with intubation and then go ahead with a nerve block in the neck is perhaps is not a practice that would be supported by current evidence.
I think if you look at that in a different way, if a North American is asking you a question like that, it would be no blocks under GA.
Yes.
But I think the Europeans are a little more flexible on that. Again, it is something, I don't think it is completely bound down with evidence, but it's more of a practice phenomenon depending on where you are that governs it. But definitely if you are starting off with regional anesthesia or your skill levels is on the lower side, probably avoid it under general anesthesia. If you really think you know what you're doing later on in your practice, maybe you can. I would leave it at that. I know it's a vague answer, but it has always been a very vague topic. But Dr. Vrishali, of all the patient population, your pediatric patients are the one that gets the blocks under GA, isn't that right? So why not for adults?
No, what she was trying to say, I think, Amjad, is that giving general anesthesia and probably trying to stick a tube or a supraglottic airway in an adult patient without muscle relaxation is really not necessary. I think that's the point she was trying to make.
Yes, and I am privileged. All pediatric patients, yes, they do get general anesthesia or sedation, and we could go ahead with sedation in adults. There is, I don't see any issues with that, but intubation, I am a bit concerned. That too without muscle relaxant.
Any fellows, please come, please take part in the discussion. Do you have any questions, or everyone has become expert in supraclavicular brachial plexus block?
Hello, sir. Good evening, sir. I am Sanjay.
Yeah, Sanjay, please go ahead.
Sir, I have one doubt. So, in this supraclavicular block, when we have sometimes when we don't get a very good resolution to differentiate between the neural and non-neural element in the bunch of grape appearance. So, when the good block demonstration shows that it, have to clearly target on the corner pocket and blocking the each trunks individually by going inside the brachial plexus sheath. Is it always necessary to get a good block to enter the sheath and block when there is a very less resolution? It is okay to deposit the local anesthetic around the bunch of appearance outside the sheath to be in the safer side.
Shiva.
Yes, Sanjay, that's a very practical question. What we actually found is, both the ways. We will call this as intraplexus or extraplexus. We will use that terminology. As you know that the bunch of grape is about, the spread about 1 to 1.5 centimeter.
Yes.
So if you put a local anesthetic all around, and all the local to seep into the core, it is going to take a time. We will call that as a soakage time. You are basically aiming to soak the nerves with your local anesthetic. Depending on the volume what you will use, all the components are going to get soaked in a different time. We will call that as a soakage time. So if you put a local anesthetic all around and you wanted to soak in every fascicle of the brachial plexus, it is going to take a variable amount of time. If you ask me what is the range, it can range from 20 to about 35 to 40 minutes. It may be vary. It is, again, you should deposit all around, especially you should put a local anesthetic between the inferior trunk and the subclavian artery. When your needle skill is become to such a level where you can access all around the plexus and effectively deposit the local anesthetic, you can get your block working in about 20 to 30 minutes. Sometimes even the coremost fibers may not get blocked. At 35 minutes, your patients may be still moving the finger. He may complain little bit of discomfort, especially while they are manipulating the bone, because the bone receives the supply from the coremost fascicles, that is center of the clusters. So these are all the, I would not say problem, the dynamics of depositing local anesthetic all around. This is applicable to all the nerves. When you go to the intraplexus, you can distribute the local anesthetic between different fascicles. The soakage time is going to be less. It is a simple difference between epidural and spinal. For the same surgical procedure, one layer out, you are depositing 15 ml of local anesthetic. Even it takes about 30 minutes to have a good dense block that requires for surgical anesthesia. But you put 3 ml into the subarachnoid space, you get the effect in 5 minutes. So this is the difference between extraplexus and intraplexus. While you are going to intraplexus, you can reduce your local anesthetic and you can distribute all around so that your latency period or soaking time is come down and the density of block is much better with a shorter period of time. How long? It may be about 15 to 20 minutes, you will get a consistent block involving all the components of the brachial plexus. Whenever you do an extra plexus, it may be between 20 to 30 minutes. So this is the only difference between them. The problem with the concern with the intraplexus is when you're going inside, you should have an attention or the knowledge or the skill of identifying fascicles, connective tissues, which is upper trunk, which is division. So you should, unless you understand all those things, have a good needling skills. If you try to attempt an intraplexus, you may injure the fascicles. This is a concern with intraplexus injections. So you have to have a balance between the two. Where is your competence? How much your understanding and needling skills? Depending on that, you can make your injection more precise. But the difference between extraplexus and intraplexus is the difference between epidural and spinal. Both the things will provide surgical anesthesia if you put it in the right place.
Okay, sir. Thanks a lot.
Senthik, can I just add to your question? One more thing is there are evidences which are clearly telling us that the concomitant peripheral nerve stimulation may be, they're using a word redundant and has not shown to increase the success rate of the block. This is just to make all of us aware of what is written recently on it. One more question, if I may ask to all of us here is, we all this time, even I myself took it in fact as a block which can be done in coagulopathies because it's a superficial block and we can apply pressure, unlike the infraclavicular on which our pressure, external pressure, may not just percolate till the artery which is injured by while we perform the block. But here right now they are taking this as in fact a deep block site, and they are taking it as supraclavicular block is considered a non-compressible or deep block site, and a more superficial block should be considered in anticoagulations. So this is something that we need to be aware of, although I have given these blocks in patients who were on anticoagulations.
I mean, yes, madam. I mean, this concern is really valid. But if you look at, because our adult population, the the body mass index can be varying. In pediatric, yes, we can, by a pressure, we can definitely occlude the subclavian, or we can put a significant pressure on it. But in a moderately built patient, in an adult under the clavicle, ultrasound cuts at a very deeper angle. So at that level, our ability to compress the subclavian artery is really challenging. So even if I injure the dorsal scapular artery in a very difficult sonoanatomy patients or in an obese, definitely, even though we will speak theoretically that we will compress the subclavian artery, it is not going to be possible, especially if you puncture the posterior wall. So it is prudent to think.
Get your concern. Yes, I
prudently
totally
think.
get your concern. But having said that, we have
I mean,
performed
I don't want
these
to,
blocks, isn't it?
So what
so
is the
what
middle
do we
part?
go ahead with? I mean, what
Yes,
message
How?
we give our students? Should
You
they
have to
give it
scan
or
and
should they
see.
not give it?
No, we don't want to go to that line. I would say, yeah, with an ultrasound, you can see things. If you see it, if the target is within 2 centimeters, you can clearly see the targets, everything. Then you know that whether I can compress it or not. If you see the target at 4 to 5 centimeters deep, and what angle the ultrasound probe gets that particular image will clearly tell us it is very difficult to compress. So I would say all the evidences arises out of our practice only. If you see the targets, you will know. I think we will, for our fellows, I mean, as an overall, my suggestion is we should more towards, I mean, attach the theoretical background to their doing and then see why these comes off. Like even for the first question, whether should I stick the wedge under the shoulder or not? When TVS sir expressed it with a very practical solution, because why he wanted to make it is to achieve a proper ergonomics, to make the patient comfort. At the same time, what you are expressing also is very relevant, because in a proximal shoulder, they should not try to put a sheath underneath and elevate it, because it will be so painful. So we are discussing a different patients. So the fellow should understand, for doing a particular act, there is a thing that we are expecting. So it should not be a fixed rule. We should not put a wedge or we should put a wedge. So they should go by patient, by putting it what they are trying to achieve. If that is already there, if the supraclavicular fossa is maximally extended, there is no need to put anything. So I think that is what, we should, inculcate them. In that aspect, I would scan and then decide whether I can compress this or not. If it is too much vascular, I would really think. Yes, sir.
So you want to add anything?
Looking at one article, Ritesh, in the Canadian Journal of Anesthesia. This was published in August 2019 by Bansui and colleagues. This is a practice advisory on the bleeding risks for peripheral nerve and interfacial plane blockade, evidence review, and expert consensus. So as per this article, the supraclavicular brachial plexus block with ultrasound has been classified as an intermediate risk procedure. So there are some which are classified as low risk, there are some that are classified as high risk. This is classified as intermediate risk. Interscalene brachial plexus, the supraclavicular brachial plexus, and the infraclavicular brachial plexus are all three grouped as intermediate risk. Axillary brachial plexus, for some reason, is low risk. So I can share this article with all of you. The fellow should be able to read this. Yes, going back to what Shiva said, you have to apply your own practice and your ability to carry off a block, even in anticoagulated patients. So,
yes, sometimes it would be the best thing to do, taking into account the risk benefits. So,
yeah, any more questions from any fellows? Hello.
Ritesh, we have a common WhatsApp group of fellows and mentors, isn't it?
Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah, so I'll just put the reference right away, and
sure, ma'am.
Whatever TVS sir has also said, I'm sure fellows can read it and keep themselves updated. Yeah. So I'm just sharing that.
Yeah, one comment regarding the the tourniquet application under the brachial plexus block. I mean, I saw Somita was describing we need, intercostobrachial nerve infiltration for tourniquet pain relief. Actually, the tourniquet pain relief is basically arising from the sparing of musculocutaneous nerve when people have tried with axillary block. Where they are trying to do a landmark guided or PNS guided, the tendency is to miss the musculocutaneous nerve because it is well away. So when the biceps muscle is getting squeezed against the humerus, that produces a muscle ischemia, and muscle is the pain generator. But that time they thought that was because of intercostobrachial. They infiltrated, and somehow sometimes they found some relief because they might have injected into the musculocutaneous as well. I don't know how this concept arises, because as we all of us know, in any brachial plexus block, the intercostobrachial nerve is going to get spared. But we have done n number of cases without any infiltration. At least, I mean, TVS sir would have agreed to that.
Yes.
You would have
Yes,
done
I
some
agree.
1,000 cases awake.
Yes, I agree.
Without even a single case of tourniquet pain.
Very
So
true.
if you spare some of the components, yes, patient will have a tourniquet pain. It's not because of intercostobrachial nerve. We need not give subcutaneous infiltration. So that is one point I wanted to emphasize to all the fellows. So the tourniquet pain is because of muscle, and it is not because of intercostobrachial nerve. You need not block it for a purpose of tourniquet application. If the patient has got tourniquet pain, you have to understand that you have missed some of the components of brachial plexus. They are not soaked effectively. The core fibers, especially the musculocutaneous fibers, are not soaked effectively. That is what it is.
Thank you.
Shiva, I had gone through an article. I don't remember the exact publication where it was done. There it was written that you have the 70% of your tourniquet pain is from the musculocutaneous.
Yes,
and
that's what I
still you have component of intercostobrachial giving rise. If you don't block it, there are chances of having a tourniquet pain. There's some percentage because of the if you're not blocking the intercostobrachial, but the primary component is the musculocutaneous. So if you have blocked the musculocutaneous, you have almost cut 70 to 75% chances of your tourniquet pain.
Yeah, because I yet to see a tourniquet pain. That's why it was little,
Yeah, I agree with Shiva here. The intercostobrachial nerve is just a cutaneous nerve. It's nothing else. It should not get involved in any sort of ischemic pain. If anything, it is going to be sensing a bit of pressure there, which is probably not pain, it's pressure. That's what it is.
maybe, yeah, maybe.
Same
Maybe it may be after 2 hours or something.
I have
even though the
never
mechanism
blocked
is
an
different.
intercostobrachial nerve till now.
Yes, yeah.
I don't.
You have never
Yeah.
done it, yeah.
Yes, me too. Not blocked in adults.
Amjad, you want to add?
I just want to go back to Atif's presentation. Both the fellows, thank you for those presentations. Couple of things. Atif, you had a very nice quality video posted for your blog. However, I was a little disappointed that your images of the still images of the ultrasound picture were again from Mysora. And they were terrible pictures. Those pictures are pictures that, I probably learned on 10 or 12 years ago. They haven't changed it. So that was terrible images, and the images from your machine look very nice in that video. And coming to that video, I would request you to review that video again. I think your upper trunk was somewhere on the other side of the image. Shiva, what do you say about that?
Yeah, it was well separated. That's what I said.
Well
that
separated.
Use injection only on the posterior division.
Well off.
Well off.
So you
So
just have a look at that video once again. The upper trunk structures were separated and on their way elsewhere. So when you moved your needle the second time and you said that you were injecting over the upper trunk, it was probably somewhere in the middle. I think so. Something for you to review.
Yeah, I mean, this again points to it, as we discussed last time. Since it is a fellow classes, I think we can discuss more of your own blocks. You can play the video and discuss about your own patients, take out the identity, put a what the problem that you faced, which are all the blocks failed, you talk about it. We will discuss it.
Yes.
I mean, this is the platform we should be doing that, and not a theoretical talks. We don't want to do, this is what we did in MD. We wanted to discuss only where you failed, where you miserably failed, where you developed complications, where you are not finding a solution, where you stuck, where you are not agreeing, what you wanted to disagree. That is what we should be discussing. You should frankly tell, this is I have not seen, this is I have not done, this doesn't work for me. I have seen people are failing it. It's not working. This is what we should be discussing more. If you put a video, I mean, it gives a lot of opportunity to shorten your learning curve, and we can discuss a lot. I think we should involve more of those things. I mean, that is what I would suggest.
Sir, I have one more query, sir. Senthil.
Yes,
Yes,
sir.
Senthil, please.
Sir, I recently did a finger amputation, little finger amputation. Index finger amputation, sir. In the emergency, actually. So I did a supraclavicular block, actually. In that, I got the twitches, not very good twitches, but at around 0.7. Then I didn't advance it, and then I had given the drug, actually, because the surgeon was in a hurry. So I gave the drug around 20 ml around the brachial plexus in the supraclavicular region, and it took some time really to bring in the action, but it was around the brachial plexus, and that it was an adequate volume. It almost soaked in a donut appearance around the plexus. But then I don't know if it is because of the urgency, I had to give a median nerve block at the wrist for a rescue. Do we really have to do like that, or we wait for good action to come?
Senthil, this is the proximal most block for the distal most surgery. So whenever you do a supraclavicular block, if you wanted to paralyze the hand muscles, that is the thenar and hypothenar, what local anesthetic did you use?
I used ropivacaine 7.5%.
Ropivacaine 7.5%. So that I will take it as an equivalent to 0.5% bupivacaine?
Yes,
okay.
Sir.
So if you do 20 ml 0.5% bupivacaine, right now we are doing a study to look at the complete conduction blockade. That means the hand muscles to become zero. At the end of 40 minutes, only 20% of people out, we did almost 20 cases, only 8 patients has got complete paralysis. The remaining 12 patients at the end of 40 minutes, still they are doing this in ultrasound guided supraclavicular brachial plexus block, intraplexus injection, what I am talking about, 20 ml, the same thing what you did. The block is perfect. That means we looked at all the components. We look at individual upper trunk, middle trunk, inferior trunk divisions. We will not miss anything. When you deposit the local anesthetic like that, till even it takes about 50 to 60 minutes for your hand muscles to become zero. This clearly indicates when you use a long-acting local anesthetic, it has to produce a complete soaking of the core most fiber. It takes that much amount of time. So it is not surprising that your block will fail, even if the surgeon touches it at 30 minutes or at 40 minutes. So
Sir,
it is because of a block dynamics. It is not because of your failure.
Okay.
We will get away with the forearm procedures because the fascicles that come to the forearm might have soaked before the intrinsic muscles of the hand. That is the reason for your failure. So how to do these sort of fingers? Better to go for an axillary. Or if you do a supraclavicular, as you said, put 4 ml into the mid forearm, median, ulnar and radial. This is what we do. If you wanted to do a bony procedure at the finger, if you do a supraclavicular block, even if you use a xylocaine, you have to wait for 20 to 30 minutes to make it completely zero. To get your surgical anesthesia at the bone, I'm talking about.
I initially thought for the tourniquet pain, I will do the supraclavicular. Otherwise, I was initially planning to do a wrist median nerve block only.
Okay. For tourniquet pain also, you can do an axillary block. See, even if you put an axillary block, there will not be any tourniquet pain.
Yes, sir.
You
I
understand?
didn't hear it.
So yeah. So whenever you wanted to go for the finger, it's basically because of the soakage time. It's nothing problem with the block because you are doing a more proximal most block for the distal most structure. The fibers that supply your fingers will going to lie in a central more of every fascicles. So the local anesthetic to reach that core fibers, it is going to take a time. The soakage time is little more. So you have to wait for it, or you deposit the drug more distally so that these fibers will come to the surface where your latency period will be shortened.
Shiva, I have a question.
Yes, sir.
Whenever we applied tourniquets and we did not give a block or we gave a distal block, people would say give a ring block around the upper aspect of the tourniquet. I mean, what is your comment on that? How effective is doing a ring block?
Sir, actually, I have not, so far I have not done the ring block at all. I have done all the forearm procedure predominantly under axillary, but none of the patient complained. The surgical duration is 1 to 1.5 hours. So I have to admit that. I don't know, maybe if they do for 2.5 hours, how the patient behaves is a different ball game. But less than 1.5 hours under axillary block, predominantly, maybe about 500 to 700 cases in the last 5 years, we have never seen a single patient who complains of a tourniquet pain. So I don't know how it is originated at that point of time. Maybe that is the only option they might have had at that point of time. So that might have, would have, for example, by a gate control theory, if you inject near the pain generating place, maybe this subcutaneous distension itself can reduce some amount of tourniquet nociception. Maybe that would have been the mechanism. Or I have no idea.
Shiva, you told about the forearm procedures under axillary block, right?
Yeah.
What about the ulnar aspect of the forearm?
Yeah, well, we will block the ulnar nerve as well. Yeah, okay. That what you're talking about is...
but this aspect, the ulnar aspect, you have got from the medial...
Arun ஒரு வெபினார்ல இருக்கிறாரு, நான் கால் பண்றேன்.
Yeah, you have
the medial cutaneous nerve of forearm, anyway, we are not blocking it, but whenever we are depositing 20 ml of local anesthetic, it gets soaked.
Yeah.
Even in every axillary block, we are not seeing the, sometimes we could able to see the medial cutaneous nerve of arm, but the medial cutaneous nerve of forearm, these are all direct branches from the plexus, but we are not identifying them individually while we are doing the axillary block, but with our local anesthetic volume, it invariably gets soaked. So there is no situation where we spared the ulnar side. This has happened in supraclavicular block where we have missed the inferior trunk, but it has not happened in the axillary block, especially with the volume of 20 ml.
I will come to your previous discussion. You told that if you're depositing around 20 ml around the axillary, it usually soaks to the medial antebrachial cutaneous nerve of the forearm, right? In that same plane, you have got the intercostobrachial running. If you scan in the axilla, because I sometimes give intercostobrachial in the axilla itself, okay, with ultrasound. You have the medial cutaneous nerve of forearm running in that same plane. We are also blocking the intercostobrachial.
It is not actually. If you look at the intercostobrachial,
that is one nerve which is not in the brachial.
This intercostobrachial is, I think, the medial cutaneous nerve of arm and the forearm. Most of the time when we identify them, they are below the deep fascia. That is, whenever you are injecting the local anesthetic at 1 o'clock position around the median nerve, if you look at it, it will be little superficial to that, the medial cutaneous nerve of arm and then forearm. So they are well below the deep fascia, whereas this intercostobrachial nerve, it travels in the subcutaneous plane, commonly above the deep fascia. Whenever you block, if you look at your probe position, it is never at the axillary crease. You may be a little more proximal. Ritesh, I mean, the next time when you do, you look at it, whenever you see an intercostobrachial, you will not be at the distal crease of axilla. You will be invariably proximal. and you see that nerve is above the deep fascia in the subcutaneous plane. And searching that in the subcutaneous plane, sometimes it looks very beautiful. I am also happy, but in the next case, it will ditch me. So I am not consistent even in identifying that. So the intercostobrachial travels in a subcutaneous plane, whereas the medial cutaneous nerve of arm and forearm are well below the deep fascia. So that is why they are getting soaked, whereas the intercostobrachial is not getting soaked at the distal axillary crease. Otherwise, it would have been blocked in every single cases. Every time, this is the one nerve that consistently misses, and it is still we are struggling to find a consistent way to do.
Any other questions, Senthil?
Any more questions? Amjad, your comments is Amjad has few more comments left.
Not too many, Ritesh. One statement was made regarding the supraclavicular area not being the best site for a catheter. Again, something that you should actually put a reference against. And again, the statement was 8 to 10 ml per hour for an infusion for a catheter. Again, that is way too much for any brachial plexus approach, especially something which is so proximal to the origins. I think 8 to 10 ml is something that we should not be thinking about in this day and age. You're looking at possibly 5 ml or below, but like he rightly said, the option of a patient control bolus is there. Small boluses can be put into a PCA sort of pump, and the patient can be dosed that way. That's all from my side.
Yeah. Any more questions? Then I think we can wind it up. Any more questions from any fellows? No questions.
Ritesh, we can put up, I mean, the schedule, I mean, you can allot, I mean,
Sure.
the takers have come easily, or you have to really find.
Yeah, no, it's not that. Basically, I'm sorry for that. I have not made a schedule, but I am trying to rotate to all centers. I have not come up with it. I'm sure. So I'm really sorry.
I'm just so that, I mean, it will become like everybody knows that how it is going to go, so that you can give individual topics to all the centers and all the fellows. You just allot them, so that they will be.
Hi, Ritesh.
Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah. Actually, Dr. Heem Jyoti had posted on our group that supraclavicular and lumbar plexus blocks are the only peripheral blocks in which injecting at a higher current than 0.5 milliamperes is recommended.
Yeah.
So, any comments on that?
Shiva.
From Sir or Dr.
I never used peripheral nerve stimulator, but what I can interpret from the ultrasound guided experience, all these comes up because some of the fascicles are still getting missed when you do one supraclavicular. Basically, the core issue is our identification of all the elements and getting the local anesthetic reaching that particular point, especially the middle and the inferior trunk. Because now we did a targeted blocks. For shoulder, we do an upper trunk injection. For forearm procedure, we are doing only middle and the inferior trunk. So that means the median, radial, and ulnar nerve almost exclusively or predominantly receives fascicle from these three trunks. And you have to get your local anesthetic in a critical concentration to these areas. Unfortunately, in the supraclavicular technique, the local that reaches these areas are somehow less, because the subclavian artery also is dynamically pulsating there. And it is not allowing the local anesthetic to effectively soak all the fascicles in a shorter period of time. The only way out is you have to get your needle without injuring all the fascicles, depositing the local anesthetic there. Only will provide an answer for this. We have seen this consistently now, because our failures is almost nil in about 4 to 5 years time. So this is what we can infer. So when you use a PNS, then again, if you are at 0.5, 0.7 for a muscle twitch, that means your needle tip is well away from the fascicles that supply the hand muscles. That's what it indicates. So if you deposit the local anesthetic at that point, again, the ability of that local anesthetic to soak the entire muscle fibers or the fascicles are going to be little lesser. That is what I can inference. So the way answer is you have to see all the components and effectively deposit the local anesthetic all around them so that they can soak them effectively.
Ritesh, something for you. I know you're shouldering these webinars all on your own. I would, in the BOS group, you can take one person to help you out to make the calendar, because I can see that you are working all by yourself. Or you can, or we both can sit tomorrow and finish off the calendar.
I can. Amjad is there. Shiva sir is there. You are there. We'll make the calendar.
We'll make a calendar tomorrow. If you have time, you let me know, because let us all chip in. I think Ritesh is holding the fort all alone.
And Sunday, whole day is my golfing day. So Sunday I am not free.
Okay.
All right. Enjoy your golf. Wear a mask.
Yeah. We are live on Facebook from today onwards. So all our YouTube, we were not able to.
Ritesh, you can stop live now.
Yeah.
Thank you,
Just Savita.
Yes, sir.
Stop Facebook live.
I will do that, sir. I will do that.
Then we'll start speaking.